Okay, so I think we're going to get started. Welcome everyone to Cloudastructure's webinar focused on car break-ins, and we have three amazing attorneys here to answer your questions today on, theft, what car break-ins are doing to multifamily properties, and just hear from you. Okay, so I'm going to start with some introductions. We'll then go into the scope of the problem, which is actually I'm learning more and more about it, and in terms of the increase in car break-ins, and then we'll open it up to our lawyers today to answer your questions, as well as Whitney from Cloudastructure from her multifamily experience, and then we'll open it up to you all. So Whitney, why don't you describe Cloudastructure and what we do?
Yeah, absolutely. So Cloudastructure really offers multifamily partnerships, a full end-to-end solution. So we can do everything from coming onto your communities and doing a site assessment. We have hardware, but really what we love and we're passionate about is offering remote guarding and a proactive solution in stopping crime in real time. So as we get into car theft and other unwanted activities in your communities that you're experiencing, historically, it's always been a reactive approach, and Cloudastructure is able to actually bring a proactive approach in stopping crime in real time by the marriage of artificial intelligence and human intelligence. So I'll keep it at that. I won't go into too much sales pitch, but we are very excited. We are laser focused in multifamily owners and operators and excited to be here.
All right, Melinda, do you want to do the little bio on Offutt Kerman?
Beth. I am counsel with Offutt Kerman. I am part of the Maryland team in the Landlord Representation Group. Offutt Kerman is a medium-sized law firm. We've got almost 300 attorneys now, 500 total staff. We have offices in 9 different states and the District of Columbia. We have an office in Los Angeles, California. That's our furthest reach right now. We have an office in Delaware. We have 4 offices in Maryland, 3 in Pennsylvania, 2 in South Carolina, 2 in New Jersey, 2 in New York, 1 in Virginia, and 1 inside the District of Columbia. We do basically every type of law except for plaintiff personal injury and criminal law. So we are full service for corporate, forming your corporations, drafting your leases. We will do mass tort defense. So we defend occasionally slip and fall cases at your property, those types of things. We will handle creditor bankruptcy. We also do more personalized stuff like family law, trust and estate. But today, everyone here is from our landlord representation group. We specifically work with the state of Maryland, but we do have landlord attorneys in our other offices as well. So we are excited to be here today and talk to you guys about what Lauren said is a increasingly difficult challenge for landlords, which is car-related crime.
We are so happy to have you and the talent as well. As you all know, with the billable rate of lawyers, we've got 3 of them here today, and it's definitely value that we're bringing to our multifamily property owners. So, let me tell you a little bit about Melinda. Melinda is a litigator at Offutt Kerman, spent 6 years representing landlords and property management companies in matters that relate to residential and commercial real property. And then we have Evan, hopefully I get your last name right.
Guinness.
Guinness, right.
I wasn't going to allow any help, but
All right.
He's an associate in landlord representation, focusing his practice on litigation and delivering efficient solutions for property owners and managers. So welcome, Evan. And then we have Charity as well. Charity Martin is an associate in landlord representation. She's got some real life stories to share with you today with respect to car break-ins. Her legal career has focused on litigation and trial work. And before that, she was a prosecutor at Baltimore City State's Attorney Office. So we're going to jump into the scope of the problem. As we all know, that's why we're all here today. Car break-ins are a huge rising issue. 1 million cars are stolen annually. It seems actually a little low. I would think there's more, but it's on the rise. And as a multifamily property owner, I think we're here to kind of understand how we could perhaps mitigate some of these break-ins and make properties a little bit more secure. But, I'm going to open it up to the lawyers first in terms of what you guys are seeing with respect to the problem.
Right. So I live in the city of Baltimore, which if anyone pays attention to the news, we're in the news semi-regularly, the stuff that goes on here. And we have not been immune to the rapid rise in car thefts across the country. I candidly thought that we were going to be number one, but I was doing some preparation for this morning, and Baltimore is not even in the top 10 for the highest car theft rates in the country. Number one is actually Bakersfield, California, and number two is Denver, Colorado, which I found surprising. But last year in the city of Baltimore, we had over 11,000 vehicle thefts. In the first 3 months of this year, we had 1,500. Car thefts were up almost 200% last year from the year before that. And so far this year, they're up almost 70%. They're up 69% from what they were even in 2023. So definitely there is a lot of vehicle related theft going on. I cracked a couple jokes earlier about, you should not venture into the city of Baltimore if you are driving a Kia or a Hyundai, because those are the two that are the hot ticket items right now. They're big on following the TikTok trends here in the city of Baltimore. So we've sort of had to deal with the car theft thing. And then there was another one unrelated to car theft where they were riding around shooting people with BB guns just on the streets. And that was a TikTok trend too. So I think that even though car theft seemed to have gone down a little bit, probably in the last decade or so, I believe because the technology in the cars improved. Now we have TikTok. So as soon as someone figures out how to break into a Kia, they share it with 3 million of their closest friends, and then away we go. So obviously this is a problem that everyone is dealing with, but particularly for landlords, because you're going to have tenants who, if they are victims of this, are going to be pretty mad at you, sometimes justifiably and sometimes not. So that's really what we're here to talk about today, is how do we marry the issues that we have going on with being a landlord, and how do we try and cut down on your liability as much as we can? You can never get it to zero because it's just not reality. But, if you can get it as low as you can, then it's one less thing that's going to keep you up at night on a regular basis, at least.
Yeah, and we did a multifamily crime poll, as you can see the results here, and the top concern was car break-ins. But curious with the audience here, do you agree with the results here on this slide? Are car break-ins really your top safety concern, or what are some other concerns? Because we do plan on having more webinars in the future, but it would be good to know if this is also one of your top concerns. So just if you want to put a little response in the chat, that would be great. Whitney, anything you want to share with respect to the scope of the problem before we jump into the litigation side of things?
Well, I'm just looking at some of the comments, and it looks like we hit the nail on the head with the car break-ins being the number one at properties. And to be honest, my background, I actually come from the operations side of multifamily, and I firsthand had the experience of losing residents, and that resident retention is so important around your security and surveillance. And so this is why I think I'm passionate, and I would have loved to have the opportunity to kind of pick the brains of the best, legal team out there about liability car break-ins and everything that goes into the owner and operations side. So I'm just excited to have the group here and dive in. But I think you kind of hit the scope of the problem. It looks like from the comments, everybody's very familiar and can relate.
Okay, Evan and Charity, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think at this point, I'm acknowledging the comments, and that car theft is an issue. I believe that this presentation, this webinar, will go a lot into detail about how we can lower the liability, as Melinda said. But of course, we can't get it all the way down, but we can definitely give you some tips and pointers of how to decrease your liability.
And I second that.
Okay, great. Well, then without further ado, let's see if I can get this slide to move. Let's open it up to the civil litigation challenges. Melinda, do you want to take it away here?
Sure. So when you boil it down, what we're really talking about here is premises liability, right? As a landlord, you have people coming and going on your property all the time, whether it be your tenants' guests, people there with the permission of your tenant, people there with your permission. You've got delivery drivers, you've got, door dashers, all kinds of things. So people going in and out of your building all the time. Generally speaking, you have a duty as a landlord to provide a safe, habitable place for your tenants to live, and a safe, habitable place for your invitees and guests to go. That's not limitless. So then it becomes, did you know or should have known that whatever the crime that is occurring is a problem? Because generally speaking, you have no immediate liability for the criminal acts of third parties, right? Somebody comes onto your property, commits a crime. That's not automatically going to be your fault. Unless if it was your employee who was doing it, that's another situation. But somebody who's just a random bad actor comes onto your property, steals a car, it's not immediately your fault. But if you knew or should have known that this was a problem, it potentially is your fault. Or if you knew that it was a problem and you've already taken measures to protect the property and those measures break down, then it's potentially your problem. If you have a parking garage next to your building that you own and you have a gate with a pass key, theoretically, people who are not your residents or don't have your permission to be there aren't going to get in. Let's say the gate breaks. If the gate breaks and then you have somebody come in and vandalize your residents' cars, I think you potentially have a problem because you knew the garage should have been secure. You took steps to secure it and then it broke. So that's where your liability starts to attach. First time somebody gets a car stolen out of your parking lot, probably nothing to worry about. If it's the third time in a week, I think you have to circle the wagons and start discussing ways that you can, as a landlord and as a property owner, cut down on the risks, whether it be you increase your security, you restrict access to the cars, like in a parking garage, you put cameras in, whatever it is. If you know that it's a problem, you have to take steps to address the problem. Otherwise, you're not providing your tenants with a safe place to live. So that's step number one. If you've already put in security measures in place, you have to make sure that they're working. So you can't just ignore it if something breaks down. If something does break down, you may need to move to an alternate form of security until whatever broke down gets fixed, right? If it's going to take you a month and a half to fix the gate, you may need to hire private security to come and do periodic patrols or to sit there 24 hours a day until you get the gate fixed, because you've already established your duty to protect the premises with the gate. To give a little bit of a disclaimer here, we are Maryland attorneys. So our advice is largely going to skew towards what it is like in Maryland as far as premises liability. Different states have different laws. Every state is different as far as their landlord tenant laws and their premises liability laws. I think some of these general principles are going to apply to all of you, but when you have a situation like this, please, please, please reach out to your local counsel, whether it's us here at Offutt Kerman or another attorney. Always consult with them when you have an issue arise, just to make sure that whatever your local rules are in line with what I'm telling you right now, because I cannot guarantee that my Baltimore City advice is going to be perfect advice for anyone in Los Angeles, California. But generally in Maryland, your defenses to a premises liability claim are going to be contributory negligence or assumption of the risk. Okay, not every state has contributory negligence, but what that basically means is if I was the victim, I did anything, even 1% of what happened is my fault, I get nothing. I get nothing at all because I contributed to the negligent situation that caused my injury. Other states use different calculations there. Some states, it's comparative. So whatever percentage you contributed to the problem, that's the percentage that you're financially liable for. So make sure you check with your attorney about the negligence laws.
Can you give us an example of that? Like how would you determine the percentage?
Sure. So I'd say, let's say I park my car in your parking garage and the gate is broken and all the doors are unlocked. But I also leave my car unlocked with all my windows rolled down and the keys on the seat, right?
Okay.
And that's a pretty extreme example, but I'd say that at least half of that is my fault, right? Half of it is the landlord's fault because they had an unsecured garage. But then I turned around and left my car unsecured, and that part of it is what I contributed.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. So that's your number one defense, is that the tenant or your guest, whoever it is, did something to contribute to the risk of the situation. The second one is the assumption of the risk. They knew that they were driving into a crime-ridden area and parked their car there anyway. They should know that the likelihood of their car getting stolen. So sometimes it can be helpful to notify your tenants that this is going on. We've had a rash of car break-ins in our parking lot. Please be vigilant. Make sure you don't leave anything in your car. Make sure you lock all of your doors. I used to live in a condominium complex, and we would periodically have just a rash of car break-ins and car vandalisms in our parking lots. And they would just go down the row and try every single car. And if they found one that was unlocked, they'd go in. If they saw things on the seat that were of value, they'd break the window. They never touched my car. I never had a problem because I left nothing in there and I always locked it. So, they're not going to go out of their way to mess with my stuff when there's
Easier
lower
target.
hanging fruit right next to them, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
if you normally have a locking gate on your parking garage and it is broken, I recommend that you send out a notification to your tenants and let them know our parking garage gate is currently broken. Please be extra vigilant. We have had a rash of vandalisms on the second floor or whatever it is. We're going to do our best to keep you guys safe, but we need your help too. It's basically a help us help you.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I'll add to that and go back to Melinda's first point is that I think that when you're looking at being an attorney, you're always looking at what you want to be able to say for that hypothetical potential lawsuit. And, I find in defending landlords, the best is when the landlords are very proactive and have a list of things that they did, a list of steps that they took in order to prevent whatever is happening. So, there is the assumption of risk and there's the contributory negligence, and that's all great. But you have to remember, as I'm sure a lot of these landlords know, especially the ones in Maryland, when you're trying to defend your case in front of a judge or jury, you guys we're not going to be able to point the finger as much. You can do that. And of course, legally you can do that. But the first thing you want to do is say, I did my part to prevent anything that happened. And then you want to point the finger and say, and look what everything they could have done in order to prevent it. So that's just a little hot take.
And there's always the question on access to footage. Can one of you speak to that? Like, tenant wants to see the video, or what are the legalities around the video footage itself and the access?
So putting on my prosecutor's head, I would always encourage, every situation is different, but I would always encourage to share that footage, not only with the tenants, but also with law enforcement. With prosecution, you pretty much get out of it what you put into it. So when situations like this happen, you call law enforcement. The best thing to do is try to give them as much evidence that you have, as many documents, incident reports, witness statements, like gather as much documents and evidence as you can possibly provide and give it over to the officers as soon as possible. I know with some security footages, when I used to be a prosecutor, they would say, oh, my footage rolled over after 5 days. And so they completely lose the whole incident that was perfectly captured on camera. So if that's the case, try to preserve that footage and the best of your ability to preserve it and hand it over as soon as possible. But yeah, with sharing the footage with the tenant, if the case were to go to trial, they would see it anyway. So better see it now than later.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that and just say, as a former prosecutor myself, there was definitely, it was kind of a 50-50 bet in terms of if there was an incident somewhere that had video surveillance, a lot of times, at least in Prince George's County, you're not going to have detectives calling for it. You're going to have the prosecutor handling the matter, calling for it. And, you can get a warrant and go that way. Unfortunately, sometimes with the resources you have, you just kind of have to call and say, hey, do you mind if I get this footage? And I think as we'll keep saying probably throughout this webinar, it always depends. But if you're hesitant to show video, I would just say, try to determine what it is the seeker is looking for. Are they looking for one incident that happened on a particular date that involves their car? If it's something like that, I don't really see a huge downside into letting them see that. If it's law enforcement who's coming in and saying, hey, can you send us all the video from your parking garage from the last 3 months? Then I would be a little skeptical and say, well, why? So questions like that can kind of help you make decisions on what you can share and stuff to that nature.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point all of you are making, is when you're looking at your surveillance solution, having something that lets you narrow it down to a time period, to a particular person, location, and then quickly kind of stitching together those videos so that you can send them to the police is very helpful. And we actually find that creating incident reports for our customers helps validate the incident, and the police actually get more involved because you've sort of handed them all the things that they need to actually do the work, which is very helpful.
I was just going to sort of piggyback off of all of that. And I see Jessica asked the question in the chat that I was going to bring up as well. If you have property in Prince George's County, Maryland, you are dealing with a new law now where they recently imposed a security camera mandate. If you are a landlord in the county and you have what's called a high density building, you have 100 units or more, you are now required to have security cameras on your property in all of the common areas. And you are also required to share the footage with any tenant who asks, any law enforcement member who asks, and anyone with, quote, a bona fide reason to see the footage. So if somebody is visiting their friend in your apartment complex and their car gets vandalized and they come to you and say, hey, my windows got smashed out in your parking lot last night, can I see the footage? You have to show it to them. And I honestly don't see anything wrong with that. Like Evan and Charity said, I think it makes their job from a prosecution side easier. I think it frankly looks good for your tenants when you are cooperating with law enforcement. You're trying to help them find the responsible person so that they can get justice. They're less likely to be angry at you over it if you're cooperating with the process. But it is always going to be situational. If they want, unfettered access to the last 5 months of all of your cameras, my first question is going to be why? What are you looking for? Because you do have privacy concerns as far as your other residents. You don't necessarily want somebody just crawling through all of your footage of everyone who lives in your building. But, if they come to you and they say, this happened, I want to see the footage. I generally don't understand why people don't want to give it over. Sometimes there are reasons, but that's when you call your local counsel and you have a discussion about that particular scenario and what happened. Yeah. This is not in Montgomery County, the camera mandate. This is just Prince George's County, Maryland right now.
Right.
And that's a good point, Melinda. I think part of the criteria, for PG County, especially when they're looking and vetting at their surveillance vendors, that shareability and ease of use for them to quickly get it to their legal counsel to get, a second opinion if they should share it with authorities, or if the authorities ask for it, being able to share that quickly. I think that is something that should be part of their criteria when they're looking at surveillance vendors, because it is going to be, starting at PG County mandate, but as we know, it quickly grows to other counties. So I do think that's something that our audience should be aware of as well.
Right. Mm-hmm. That and the 30-day storage capabilities up to even 100, even up to 180 days in some instances.
Right. That's a good point. Thank you for reminding me of that, Lauren. The PG County law does require you to automatically store all of your footage for at least 30 days now. And if someone comes to you and lets you know of an incident, then you have to A, let them see the footage, and B, store it for 180 days at that point in time, just to see if it, anything comes from it. And I think that's a rule that makes sense. I'm sure it was very frustrating for Evan and Charity, whenever they needed to try and get security footage to hear, oh, well, that got automatically deleted 6 months ago,
Yeah,
so if somebody comes to you and they let you know that there was an incident, I think that you do, as a landlord, have a duty to investigate it. Write up an incident report. Please write an incident report. We lawyers, we want incident reports for everything, every single thing, because it makes our job so much easier.
It really does.
When there's a paper trail and everything has been properly documented. Write up an incident report. If there's any kind of security footage, note in the incident report that there's security footage and save that footage. Even if you only save it for your own files at first, you never know when it's going to come back up. Tenants could turn around and sue you up to 3 years later for these types of things. So even though the new law doesn't require you to save it for 3 years, there's going to be times where security footage is going to help you. They're going to claim something happened on your property and you can look back and say, no, it didn't. That did not happen. So I understand the limitations of some of the security systems that you guys are working with, and everything automatically deletes and all that kind of stuff. But if you are put on notice, If you have knowledge, then that's when your liability starts to attach.
Melinda, I think there's a question in the chat. I don't know if we're doing questions as we go along.
Yeah, go right ahead.
And Melinda, you're not allowed to say it depends, okay?
Okay.
It says it's to your gate hypothetical. It says, what if the gate is not broken and they still get in because it's an armed gate and they steal a resident's tires? If that happens, what should the property do next? That's from Miss Myra Marquez.
It depends. You know, I think it really would depend. Is it the first time someone has gotten in and stolen tires? I'd say, again, was this foreseeable? That's the main question. Was this foreseeable? Did you know, or did you have reason to know that people were going to be able to go under the arm gate and steal the tires? If it's the 7th time in a week that this has happened, you got a problem. If it's the 7th time in 6 months that it happened, I think you probably have a problem. If it's the first time, we had no idea. We thought that our security was secure. And then they found another way around it. You know, you guys have to evolve as the criminals evolve.
Yeah.
You know, if it starts to become a problem, then maybe you need to look into a different type of gate, one that's going to keep out people who just walk in to steal the tires.
Right. And I'll add to that. I'll just say again, proactiveness. Like, what is, if it happens one time, probably it's not an issue, probably you're safe. But if it happens several times, is the arm gate working? Do we have video surveillance? Have we made an incident report? Have we contacted law enforcement? So I think the answer to that is it depends, but the property needs to be proactive in finding a solution if it is a problem.
Yeah, and I would love to jump in here. You know, one of the offerings we have is remote guarding, where we tie speakers to the cameras. So when suspicious activity, like somebody scoping a car to steal the tires, happens, our live guards actually do a voice down and deter that activity, unwanted activity, from escalating to criminal activity that then is such a painful pain point for, you know, the properties to deal with. So that is something, you know, if you have existing camera infrastructure, to just add that speaker and add our live guard that will review the video footage, do the talk down, deter that activity from happening and escalating to criminal activity. And then we actually do a full incident report too. So we actually take all that heavy lifting off the on-site team, which is just one less thing that they have to worry about. That's
I was thinking about one of our customers who I think had like 17 or 20 break-ins in like one day. I mean, think of all those incident reports if they had to sit down and do that on top of just dealing with their daily activities. So having that heavy lifting, as Whitney talked about, is really important. And I can't recall if you mentioned the deterrence effective rate, but for us, it's been close to 100%. So in other words, if you see the folks stealing the tires and you talk down and you say, hey, you know, I see what you're doing, you're being watched. For us, our experience has been, you know, 100% of the time they run away. So it is a really good deterrence mechanism. I'm going to move us to the next slide, but we can continue to touch on this process. Let's move it to criminal challenges, criminal prosecution challenges. I'm not sure who wants to speak to this on the legal side, but I'll open it up here as well.
Not me. This one.
I think this was Charity. Were you going to touch
this
on?
Might be Charities, yeah.
So we did briefly touch on just with prosecuting these type of cases, like you get out of it what you put in. We did talk about like always trying to do incident reports. If you could do like witness statements, go around if the incident happens, go around and just ask, did anyone see anything? Did anyone hear anything? Also, just the video footage. If you have video footage, I know there was a question if the properties are required to show the footage to the tenants. It is encouraged to do that just so everyone is on the same page. You never know, they might be trying to go another route with this case. They may be trying to do a civil suit. I mean, as much information that the victim has, they'll be able to maybe resolve it quicker. There was another question about if the property is legally responsible for giving the tenant letting them copy the video with their cell phone. Again, I mean, that's not a legal obligation, but if that's something that the tenant wants, I would advise, I mean, it always depends, but I would just advise that you should do that just to get the ball moving with the prosecution. The more information that the law enforcement knows, the better they'll be able to assist with everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think if the tenant is wanting to record on their cell phone for litigation purposes to turn around and sue, I think they have admissibility problems as far as the evidence, but that's not really your problem as a landlord at that stage. You know, I don't necessarily think it hurts anything to let them record it, but that's going to be a judgment call. You know your tenants better than we do. And I can definitely think about situations and scenarios where you would have good reason to not want your tenants to have their own copies of your security footage. You know, maybe they put it on TikTok, you're not sure. So it's going to be one of those things where you're going to have to look at it situationally. I think, April, we answered your question. The surveillance mandate does not apply to Montgomery County. Rachel asks, what is their responsibility with informing other residents about theft or vandalization? Again, it's going to be a judgment call, and it's going to be a situational thing. If you're having a rash of package thefts, I think it is a good idea to let your tenants know we are having a rash of package theft. So please be hyper vigilant on who you let into the package room. Don't just open the door for some random person that you see in the building. I know that there have been situations where random bad actors have tried to break into apartment buildings and they can't get in, but then a resident will come by and let them in the door because they're trying to be nice or you know, whatever reason, and then it's on. You know, so I think it is always helpful to periodically remind your tenants that they need to be vigilant, that this is not just your responsibility to protect the building, it's also their responsibility to protect the building. Don't let in random people. Don't necessarily hold the door open to the parking garage for somebody that you don't know, because that person could be coming in to steal your neighbor's tires. I'd say if it's an isolated incident, you don't necessarily have to let everybody know. But if it is a repeated thing, I think you do have a duty, because you have a duty to provide adequate warning of any known risks. You have a duty to protect your tenants from foreseeable criminal acts that happen on the premises. So when it becomes foreseeable is when it has happened a whole bunch of times. And one of the ways that you protect your tenants from foreseeable criminal acts is giving them adequate warning.
Yeah, the other thing I'd like to add to that is, in addition to, like, let's say you were to put out an announcement that says you have a rash of package theft, it would also be good to give them perhaps some action items on their side, but maybe informing them on what you're doing as well to provide that level of safety and security. So sometimes we'll partner with our customers to say, hey, we have the most advanced security in the market today. Here's what we're doing to reduce package theft, right? We have proactive alerts, we have this. And so people feel safer, because as we all know, when people move out and your occupancy goes up, that starts to cost you money as well. And that's something we haven't even touched on from a legal perspective, but it is money. So that's a really good point, Melinda. Whitney, do you want to introduce this slide just to give people an idea?
Yeah, so I think this kind of goes hand in hand with the parking garage activity and how our remote guards and that 98% deterrence rate is really affected to 100% deterrence rate is affecting kind of our customer base. And so this is a real life scenario of one of our clients with a situation. Two guys came into the parking garage, is scoping the storage area, and then our guards did the proactive alert. So if you want to go ahead and play it, and then we'll get to some of the other slides. Yeah.
This is Cloudastructure Security. You are in an unauthorized area and you must leave immediately. Police have been contacted.
So I think that's a good lead into the next slide. That's really kind of going over what you should do proactively, especially in your parking garage.
All right.
Yeah, so this is de-risking your parking garage, your communities. And I think this is really some good probing questions to ask yourself and to dive in with the legal team here today. And this is actually one that has come up from a couple different customers of ours, but are more cameras or fewer cameras better in parking garage areas from a liability?
More.
There you go. Evan, yeah, I like your answer better because it's not, it depends.
I mean, I would say more. I don't see a downside in the property. I can't think of any reason why you would say, you know what, we know that we should deter crime or have some sort of deterrent in our garage, but you know what, we may not want to put too many cameras up. I mean, I guess maybe like a privacy issue would be why you wouldn't want more cameras, but I would certainly say that if you can provide more cameras and they're in sight, it just shows more of a deterrent for things like carjacking, theft, all the above.
I was gonna say, I completely agree. I guess now would be a good time for me to put in my personal experience with this. Back in February, my vehicle was actually stolen right from my driveway. When I called the police, one of the first things that they asked me was, do you have camera footage? And at the time, unfortunately, I did not. My neighbors had camera footage, but of course, it was more like onto their homes, onto their driveways, their front doors, and it wasn't positioned to see what was actually going on at my house. So from my own experience, more cameras are always better than less or none. And after that whole incident, I now have cameras. I have the motion sensor lights. I mean, I feel like I'm more equipped to better handle if the situation was to happen again. I would have more evidence to give to law enforcement so that I could actually have a good outcome. Fortunately, in this situation, I did have a good outcome. I got my vehicle back. They just never knew who took it. If they had
Yeah,
camera footage.
the other thing that I see, we look at footage a lot from our customers, you know, when we see incidents, and I'm often surprised at how far away the camera is. And there's some you know, obviously there's costs associated with more cameras, right? And so oftentimes there's a trade-off where sometimes you're thinking, well, I don't want to put cameras everywhere because that's going to increase my cost. But there's ways that you can just make sure most of your high trafficked areas are covered. There's more powerful cameras that can go further. There's better lighting, which helps the viewing. So there's all kinds of ways that you can perhaps maybe get away with slightly fewer cameras, but in the end, if you miss the footage, then you know you're not able to offer it to the police. So definitely some trade-offs there. All right, so why don't we just open it up to Q&A in general for folks. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see the Q&A as well.
Yeah, one question
yeah.
from Danielle. She said, looping back to the footage involves another residence. Should we show it? If the victim resident attacks another current resident in the footage, would we be liable for showing that footage? So it's two residents.
Yeah, so that actually is a good question. It depends. You know, so you do have some privacy concerns when it involves two different residents. And our advice, usually if two different residents are fighting, or if, you know, family members within the same apartment are fighting, our advice is usually stay as far away from that as you can until you need to get involved in it, right? I think that if one resident is physically attacking another resident, that's the situation where you need to be involved, because you now have one resident who is a criminal perpetrator and another resident who is a victim of a crime. So I think that it is okay for you to share the footage with the victim there, because again, it's a criminal activity that occurred on your property. So I think that's okay. If somebody comes to you and says, hey, I want all the footage because I think this person might have done something and I just want to see, you know, I want to track them through the building and see what they're doing, the answer to that would probably be no. I think that's a little bit more infringing on the privacy concerns. Now, in general, what we're talking about here, and this is another type of thing that varies from state to state, but you have an individual has a reasonable expectation of privacy in certain places, right? So you can't record them in certain places. In Maryland, we have what's called two-party consent, meaning both people who are being recorded have to know and agree to being recorded in order for it to be admissible in court. You can't secretly record someone and then take it in. Linda Tripp, if for those of you who were alive in the 90s and remember the Bill Clinton scandal, and Linda Tripp, she was in Maryland actually, and that was one of the issues with it. She was illegally recording Monica Lewinsky because Monica Lewinsky did not know she was being recorded, and it was happening in Maryland, which is a two-party consent state. So that's why your security cameras almost never have sound, because listening to people's capturing audio is different from capturing visuals. But in general, I personally assume that anytime I set foot outside of my house in the streets of Baltimore City, I'm on somebody's camera somewhere. And I think that that's kind of the attitude that we should start to adopt just as a society. If we're outside, we're on camera. We're being taped somewhere, whether it's government or my neighbor across the street's Ring camera, whatever it is, I'm probably being taped. I don't think that there's a reasonable expectation of privacy in a parking garage. I think there's a little bit more of an expectation of privacy in the internal hallways of your building. I think that's different. There's definitely an expectation of privacy inside their units. You can't go in and put a camera in their bedroom. That's a big time no-no. So it's always a sliding scale, and it's always going to depend on the circumstances in that particular case.
About signage, does that count as notifying, like you were being watched, this is a secure area?
Yes, it does. And
Okay.
that's why you see that a lot. That's why you see the sign saying this is a secured area. You are being recorded. It's to cut down on the claims of violations of privacy. Even though I think some of them, like if you're in a grocery store, I don't necessarily think they need the signs letting you know you're on camera. You have no reasonable expectation of privacy in aisle 9, or at least you shouldn't. But I think they do that just because it cuts down on the potential claims. That's why you see all the warning labels on anything that you buy these days. It's just to sort of put people on notice, like, you can't sue us for this. Doesn't mean they're not going to turn around and sue anyway, but it bolsters the defendant, or in this case, the landlord's claim of like, look, I didn't do anything wrong here. Not only did I not do anything wrong, I told them what was going on. So they choose to still walk around my parking garage, they should know that it's being recorded because I told them it was. A lot of your tenants sign an addendum to their lease that says they understand there's security measures in place on the property, and they understand that they are potentially being recorded. If you've got that in your lease, that is very helpful.
There's
Great.
another really great question, and I know this came up when I was actually on the operations side, and it's around using the words safe and safety, communicating to residents in your community to protect yourself as a landlord. They advocate controlled access language, but they would appreciate legal input. So I'd love to hear your take on that.
I think that is probably a good idea. You can't always guarantee safety, and nor should you. You shouldn't guarantee that nothing is ever going to happen on your property, because you don't know who's outside the door and who's going to try and come in. You know, you can screen all of your tenants, but you can't screen their guests and their invitees or the people who just walk in off the streets. So it's more of a semantics thing here, but I think that it probably is smarter. It may not necessarily have any like official formal legal impact using the word safe, but I think it's probably a good idea to get away from it. I am using it right now because that's the way that the law is written, when it says foreseeable criminal acts and reasonable duty of safety. That's the way that the law is written. But just from like a marketing standpoint, yeah, I think that's a good idea. Controlled access is better language.
I'm curious, what if they have proactive, like they advertise that they have proactive security? Is that something that you would say, is okay to advertise and market?
I think so.
Okay, did we get through all the questions here? I know someone was asking if, you have, I think we got the resident. If there's another resident in the footage, can you submit it? If someone else, you guys talked about that one, right?
The answer was maybe.
Maybe, okay. Okay.
It's always maybe.
I'd be curious to, I know PG County is the one that's kind of moving ahead with, the mandate, just in Maryland in general. Do you see this mandate as at the forefront and more to come with respect to security?
So I have not heard any rumblings about other counties or jurisdictions in the state doing this yet, but I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. The general rule of thumb that I have is DC is sort of like the place that we do not go because it's terrible for landlords. Now, Offutt-Kerman does have a DC team. I am not part of that. I want nothing to do with that. I know enough about being a landlord in DC to know that I don't want to do it, because from what my understanding, it's pretty miserable. They are extremely tenant friendly in DC. One of my favorite examples is that during the COVID pandemic, DC actually passed a law saying that if a landlord can prove that they are unable to pay their rent, they don't have to pay their rent. Like, you can't evict them for not paying their rent. Which, so, I mean, you know,
Sounds like
what is a
California.
landlord supposed yeah, exactly. What is a landlord supposed to do with that? So typically DC will do this wacky stuff, these crazy laws that are very tenant friendly. And then it's more often it's Montgomery County, but one of the counties in Maryland that's close to DC, whether it's PG or Montgomery, they will do something similar. 6 months to a year later, they will pass their own law. It's typically a little bit more watered down from what happened in DC, but they will follow suit. And then once that is a success, the trend will spread up the I-95 corridor, is what I call it. Howard County will pass a law, then Anne Arundel County will go, then Baltimore City will put it on their radar, and then they'll do it. And it just sort of like creeps into the more liberal and tenant-friendly areas of the state. Now, out on the Eastern Shore, I don't think you're going to have too much of a problem with this, because they are still more, I'd say, more landlord-friendly than tenant-friendly. But I wouldn't be surprised if the security camera mandate ends up in other jurisdictions, or potentially ends up statewide. We have a new governor, a relatively new governor now in our state, who has a big push for tenants' rights and housing initiatives. Some of it has been successful so far. He got a lot of it through our local legislature. There's going to be a bunch of new laws for us to talk about coming out in October of this year. So keep your eyes open for that. If you're a Maryland landlord, we're probably going to be talking with you guys about those changes very soon. But I would not be surprised if they did this other places. The other thing that PG County recently did was they've limited your ability as a landlord to deny applicants for criminal history. You can still deny someone if they've been convicted of certain crimes within the last 7 years. But anything that happened longer than 7 years ago, and certain crimes that are not part of their allowable screening, cannot factor into your decision anymore at all. If somebody was convicted of murder 8 years ago, it's longer than 7, and you have to let that person in to your property unless there is another reason for you to deny their application. So once they passed that, the security camera mandate started to make sense, because now you are dealing with a whole nother group of people in your applicant pool, and potentially on your properties, people that we would have told you to deny previously.
Okay, well, I think we're getting close to the hour here. I don't see any more questions coming in. If anyone wants to pop in a quick last question, but I do want to thank our panelists today for the great conversation. Are there any closing comments you guys would like to just add based on today's discussion?
I just want to thank everybody who tuned in and who came. I see a bunch of familiar names in the chat. I'm sorry that I didn't get to acknowledge all of you personally, but if you have any other questions that you think of later on, or that we didn't answer here to your liking, please feel free to shoot me an email Charity or Evan. We are happy to continue this conversation, and we look forward to hearing from you guys soon and teaching you about more fun things.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Really great getting to know you guys. And, I really want to appreciate the involvement of our attendees. So thanks for all the great questions. Everybody have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.